Good morning. I finished watching a bunch of Hitchcock movies last night, but I was too tired by the time it ended to successfully do a video. Plus, my eye was being really buggy. So, I'm going to do it now. I watched his last 4 features. I've now seen 47 features and 2 shorts. So, I'm missing, depending on what list you look at, 6 or 7 features. So I'm getting there. I just woke up. So last night, the one I started with was Torn Curtain. It's from 1966, and it stars Paul Newman and Julie Andrews. I am 90% sure I saw this when I was a kid, but I did not remember anything about it until I got to the part with Lila, what is her name? Lila Kedrova. And then I was like, I remember this scene, so I'm counting it as a new to me film because I didn't remember anything about it. Paul Newman is an astrophysicist or some sort of physicist. Julie Andrews is his assistant. When you first see them, they're in bed together because this is 1966 and the production code is starting to fall away. So these last 4 features are hard to watch because they are Hitch unleashed. It's Hitch not having to stay within the production code, and Hitch is already a little gross and perverse in the 50s, and then he's just like, I can do what I want. So this is the least gross of the 4. But they are in bed. And then slowly but surely you're like, oh shit, Paul Newman is defecting. And Julie Andrews is like, oh my god, I'm supposed to marry this guy, but he's defecting to the other side of the Iron Curtain. Like, what's happening? Eventually you discover that Paul Newman is not defecting and that he's actually a spy. And Julie Andrews realizes that she probably didn't need to follow him. It's inspired by the 2 British diplomats who defected, one of whom Another Country, the film Another Country is based on, except this is really based on the other one whose wife and kids followed him across the Iron Curtain, and what would that be like for her, although you really don't get into the interiority of the Julie Andrews character all that much. And really, the bulk of the film is not very great. The one scene that really, really works is the Paul Newman farmer's wife who killed the guy who discovers that he is actually a spy in this farmhouse. It's like a 10-minute, really tense scene that 110% is one of the most influential scenes on all of Tarantino's entire filmography. You watch that and you're like, oh shit, I know everything that Tarantino ever wants to do. The other scene that really works is the scene with Lila Kedrova. She is a countess, a Polish countess, who is trying to get Newman and Andrews to be her sponsors to the United States. And they kind of say that they will. And slight spoiler, they help her. She helps them get what they need, and then she helps them leave. And they have her address, and she's sort of crying and going, "Oh, my sponsors for the United States," and it's really heartbreaking. And you don't know if they're going to escape, but you don't know if they're going to remember to help her out after she's helped them. And it's sad, and she's the one character that you really feel for in the whole film. I want a whole film about her. And Lila Kedrova is a really interesting person. You should definitely look her up. So the next film I watched was 1967's Topaz. This film was really boring. The one thing that Hitch really has going for him is that every era of Hitch feels like that era of filmmaking. But generally, he defines that era of filmmaking. So his 50s Technicolor films are like the 50s Technicolor films, except maybe Cirque. His 60s horror films are the 60s horror films. His late era, Cold War thrillers are like Cold War thrillers of that era. Unfortunately, I don't care for that era, and I don't care for most of those films. And Topaz really felt like he was trying to make Z, although I think Z came out simultaneously, but Z is a much more interesting film. And Topaz was full of characters that I could not get into, and full of actors that I did not recognize. And so if I didn't like the character and then didn't like the actors, there was no entry point in this film. It's inspired by the Sapphire Affair. It's set in the early 60s, as leading up to the Cuban Missile Crisis. At one point they're in Cuba. All the women look really beautiful, but for the most part it's just very long and very well made because it's Hitchcock, but like hard to have an entry point to figure out why you care about any of the characters. So that was tough. Um, but and, completists and Cold War thriller lovers, this is a film for you. The next film I watched was Frenzy. Now, this is definitely Hitch Unleashed. There are boobs, there's rape, there's all the things that were sort of under the radar in Hitch films that made them sort of creepy but watchable, just let loose in this film. Um, they're sort of inspired by two cases, the Christie murders of the 1950s and Jack the Ripper. And this movie, Hitchcock movies can be very perverse, and this is like the most perverse, and it's a little gross, and I can't tell if he's commenting on the way in which men are horribly violent towards women, or if he's just perpetuating the fact that men are horribly violent towards women. I'm not sure, and the I think seeing it with modern eyes is so hard because we're so inundated with this horrible imagery of violence towards women, and this is really intense. And it's from 1972, so at the time, this was early in Hollywood's ability to have that really intense violence towards women. And what's unfortunate is, as the production code fell down, this violence, and particularly sexual violence, was only perpetrated towards women. There's very few films and scenes of this kind of intense sexual violence perpetrated towards men. And so it feels very gendered, and it feels very sexist, and it feels very misogynistic, and it's hard to it's just hard to watch. This is also a comedy, which makes it even harder because this shit should not be funny, and you should not be framing it in a dark comedy, and yet he does, and it is funny, and so you feel bad for laughing at the parts that are funny, and it's just a tough movie to get into. This is 1972's Frenzy. The final film, his final film, is Family Plot. I enjoyed this. This is a straight up dark comedy, murder mystery thriller. It does not go into gross places. It does have murder, but it's relatively low key, especially coming off of Frenzy. So it stars Karen Black, Bruce Dern, Barbara Harris, and William Devane. It has a great score from John Williams. It's based on a novel called The Rainbird Pattern. It's written by Ernest Lemon. And the plot revolves around two couples. One is a fake psychic and a cab driver who get money from people. This is Barbara Harris and Bruce Dern. Barbara Harris is delightful. She's from 1,000 Clowns, if you have not seen 1,000 Clowns. And Bruce Dern is obviously Bruce Dern. And a pair of kidnappers and professional blackmailers played by Karen Black and William Devane. Barbara Harris, while fleecing an older rich woman, discovers that the older rich woman has a nephew that she had sold off into adoption from her sister when she was younger, and she feels bad and she's dying and she wants to leave her money to this man and she wants to find him. So Barbara Harris's character and Bruce Dern, they're trying to track this man down. In doing so, they discover the couple who are the kidnappers and blackmailers, thieves, because that is the nephew. And so their plot to find this man gets them lapped into the plot of the kidnappers and jewel thieves. And will someone die? I don't know. Is it just funny and dark and full of sort of commentary on relationships and the bizarreness of just everyday life? Yes. Is it a dark comedy? Yes. Did it have a delightful ending? Yes. Was Hitch's very last shot that of a Hitchcock blonde? It was indeed. I think this was just a fun ending because it mixes a lot of his themes and a lot of his other films all into one sort of gumbo. And it's not his best film, but it's an interesting film to end on and an interesting note to end a prolific career on. So, and a much easier film to engage with than Frenzy or Topaz. So this was Family Plots from 1976. Almost all of these films are on DVD. Several of them you can watch on Watch TCM for a few more days. Got to track down the rest of Hitch's films, and then I'll be like, I've done it. So that was Alfred Hitchcock's last 4 films. Most influential director probably of all time. From 1966, Torn Curtain. From 1969, Topaz. From 1972, Frenzy. And from 1976, Family Plot.